Story 1. About 10 months ago, I visited my college best friend, Chris, in his small hometown. Although it was much smaller than what I was used to, Chris showed me around, and we spent our days exploring local bars and hanging out. On my last night, Chris brought up a place he had always wanted to explore, a remote, abandoned site a few miles out in the woods. Since we used to go on backpacking trips together in college, the idea sounded exciting. Less than 30 minutes later, we were hiking through the woods. Despite the fading daylight, we had brought headlamps. After about 20 minutes, the trail ended, and we followed a faint footpath through the trees. This narrow path led us for another hour before we spotted a house in the distance. As we approached, we noticed several more houses behind it. The scene was different from what we had imagined. The houses, though damaged and weathered, had modern siding and looked relatively recent. A tiny gravel road connected them, suggesting an abandoned attempt to build a community. Graffiti on the walls indicated that others had been there before us. We approached the first house and peered through the open doorway. Weeds had overgrown the floorboards, but the interior was otherwise empty. Just as we were about to step inside, a loud slamming sound echoed through the woods. Both of us jumped and stared at the gravel road, trying to determine where the sound had come from. After a moment of tense silence, we saw nothing and decided to enter the house. The first floor was unremarkable, but the mystery of why it had been abandoned intrigued us. The house seemed like it had once been quite nice. After exploring the ground floor, we went upstairs. The second floor was surprisingly dark, with no light filtering through the windows. The hallway was short, with only 2 doors and what looked like an attic entrance above. We opened the first door and found another empty room. However, as we were about to investigate further, we heard shuffling footsteps coming from downstairs and approaching the house. We fell silent, realizing that whoever it was might have seen us outside. The footsteps came up to the front door and then stopped. "Hello?" a voice called out. It sounded older, with a slight slur, as if the person were missing teeth. After that initial call, there was a full minute of silence. We didn't hear anything else from him and couldn't tell if he had left. Chris quietly went downstairs to check the front door. When he looked back at me, his face was pale. "There's nobody there," he said. I rushed down to see for myself, and indeed, the doorway was empty. We carefully made our way out and looked at the grass outside. There was a single line of footprints leading up to the house but none leaving. We both realized simultaneously that the person must have been hiding inside. We bolted for the woods, making our way back to the safety of the trail. The mystery of who that person was and why they wanted to talk to us remained unsolved. Given the situation, we were relieved to have left before things could escalate further. Story 2. I was on a cross-country drive, juggling a hectic schedule. I needed to wrap up some work in an office way up in Maine, so I figured I'd make the most of the trip and visit some friends and family along the East Coast. On the 4th day of my journey, I found myself driving through Pennsylvania. The state had its share of charming towns, but most of the drive was through endless stretches of nothing. To reach my destination, I had to take a series of winding, isolated one-lane roads. As evening fell, the rain began pouring down, and my fuel was running dangerously low. I hadn't seen a gas station in miles and wasn't expecting one anytime soon. After about 30 minutes of driving through the downpour and fog, I finally spotted a gas station sign. A few moments later, the station appeared ahead, nestled among the trees. It was tiny, with only 2 pumps and a small, dilapidated concession stand behind them. With no other option, I pulled in and parked. I stepped out, opening my gas tank, only to find that the pump was dead. I tried the other pump, but it was also out of order. Frustrated and with the rain pelting down, I glanced around. The place looked outdated, but that wasn't unusual for some rural gas stations. A small light glowed inside the concession stand. Hoping for some help, I dashed through the rain to the building's door. The glass was fogged up, so I couldn't see inside. I grabbed the handle, and the door creaked open. The inside was a disaster. Shelves were empty, Some were knocked over, and the place looked as though it had been abandoned for years. The light came from the back, not from an ordinary store lamp but from something more ominous. I quickly retreated outside, uneasy about what I'd seen. As I backed away, I noticed someone standing next to my car. They were drenched and peering through the windows. "Hey, what are you doing?" I shouted, rushing towards them. The person glanced at me and then looked behind me. I turned to see a man emerging from the concession stand. He had long black hair and a gaunt, unhealthy appearance. Without hesitation, he charged at me. The person by my car backed away as I scrambled inside, but the man kept coming. He tried to open my door, and as I sped away, a loud metallic scrape echoed through the car. I managed to drive another half hour before my car sputtered to a stop, completely out of gas. Fortunately, I had cell service and called for help. While waiting, I noticed a deep scratch running across my car door, a sign that the man had tried to slash it. Later that night, the police informed me that the gas station had been out of service for at least a decade. Beyond that, no one knew what might have happened if I hadn't escaped in time. The mystery of the abandoned station and its eerie inhabitants remained unresolved. Story 3. The Forgotten Theater. Growing up in the Midwest, I was always surrounded by abandoned places. By the time I was in my senior year of high school, exploring these eerie locations had become a sort of tradition among my friends and me. It was something many kids in our area did for kicks. Memorial Day weekend was coming up, offering us a blissful 3 days off from school. With the school year drawing to a close, we decided it was the perfect opportunity to visit a place we'd been dying to see: Cairo, a semi-abandoned ghost town. Although it wasn't entirely deserted, some people still lived there. Most of it had been left to decay since the late 1800s. The town's downfall was attributed to flooding and racial tensions, which led to a dramatic decline in population over nearly 50 years. The result was a landscape of crumbling buildings and empty streets, which only fueled our curiosity. On Sunday evening, around 6 p.m., my friends Tristan, Ryan, and I piled into Tristan's car. We had a 2-hour drive ahead of us, heading south toward Cairo. The drive was long and monotonous, cutting through endless farmlands with barely any towns or cities in sight. The anticipation built as we approached our destination. As we entered Cairo, the atmosphere was unsettling. The road was shrouded in darkness, with only a few faint lights in the distance, likely from the small number of residents still living there, illuminating the void in between. The sense of desolation was almost palpable. We parked next to an old, dilapidated brick building marked "Liquor." Stepping out of the car, we took a moment to absorb our surroundings. The wind howled, making the old structures creak, but otherwise, the silence was oppressive. Ryan took the lead as we walked down the road, flanked by decaying wooden houses overtaken by vines and bushes on one side, and a row of old, boarded-up shops on the other. One of these shops caught our attention. It had a sign that read "Gem" and appeared to be an old theater, complete with a ticket booth. We were excited by the prospect of exploring it, so we grabbed our flashlights and entered through a broken window. Inside, the darkness was almost total, and our flashlights provided only a meager glow. The main room was thick with dust and carried a musty odor of rotting wood and mold. Debris littered the floor. As we ventured further into the building, Ryan suddenly stopped and told us to freeze. He claimed he heard a footstep from above. Tristan and I hadn't heard anything and figured it was just the building settling. Still, we fell silent, listening for any unusual sounds. After a tense moment, Ryan broke the silence, insisting he had definitely heard a step. We decided to proceed with caution, making our way to the only other doorway in the room, which led up a narrow staircase to the theater's balcony. The second floor was where the old seats were located. About 50 dusty chairs faced a stage below. As we began to walk through the rows, a small creak behind us made us turn. In the dim light, we saw a figure standing in the corner. It was a man, looking scruffy and disheveled, his clothes ragged and his face gaunt. He was staring at us with a haunting intensity, holding up one arm. In his hand was a small revolver, which he pointed directly at me. The silence in the building was so profound that I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. Panic surged through me as Tristan, seeing the danger, sprinted back down the stairs, leaving Ryan and me behind. We tried to remain calm, telling the man we were leaving. He didn't say a word or move. Slowly and carefully, Ryan and I retraced our steps to the stairs. The instant we were out of his line of sight, we bolted down the stairs and out of the theater. We scrambled back to the car and drove away as quickly as we could, the gravity of the situation sinking in. For the next hour, we drove in silence, each of us lost in our thoughts about the encounter. It was clear that the man, once a resident of Cairo, had likely become a recluse after the town's decline. Forced to hide in the abandoned theater, he had become a part of the town's ghostly legacy. In hindsight, we were incredibly lucky to escape without any harm. The encounter had shaken us deeply, and the thrill of exploring abandoned places had lost its appeal. Since then, we've steered clear of such ventures, recognizing that some places are better left undisturbed.